and welcome everyone to today's lesson, which is about the important topic of phrasal verbs. Let me share my screen and see what we're going to do in this part 1 of the lesson on phrasal verbs. We're going to look at the difference between a phrasal verb and a prepositional verb, also understand what we mean by a phrasal prepositional verb, and then, very importantly, discuss how to learn phrasal verbs before we move on to part 2 another week. So let's start by looking at the difference between a phrasal and a prepositional verb. Both types consist of one verb, usually a short verb, and a preposition. Now, in a phrasal verb, the preposition, which is also called the particle, is closely connected to the verb. And this preposition changes the meaning of this verb. For example, in the sentence, he came to quickly after his surgery, the preposition to has completely changed the idea of the verb come. Come to means regain consciousness. A very important note that from a pronunciation point of view, when you have a phrasal verb, the stress is on the preposition. He came to quickly after his surgery. So that's a phrasal verb. Now, what about a prepositional verb? In a prepositional verb, the preposition is not connected to the verb, it's connected to the object of the verb, and it doesn't affect the meaning of the verb. So in the sentence, he came to my lecture yesterday, the word came has its original meaning. Important note on pronunciation, in a prepositional verb, the stress is still on the verb, not on the preposition. Right? So that's the big difference between phrasal and prepositional verbs. Let's look at some examples and see how we can tell which one is which. So if we drop the preposition from a phrasal verb, the sentence no longer makes any sense. For example, in our example, he came to quickly after his surgery. If we drop to and just say he came quickly after his surgery, the sentence has lost its meaning. Let's look at 3 other examples. For example, the phrasal synonym for quit is to give up. So she gave up smoking last year. If you just say she gave smoking last year, we've lost the meaning completely. As phrasal synonym for decline is turn down. For example, he turned down my invitation. If we drop down, he turned my invitation, makes no sense because the preposition is the major part of the meaning. Another example, phrasal synonym for extinguish is put out. They managed to put out the fire. Get rid of out, and the sentence becomes nonsensical. They managed to put the fire, right? So remember, that's why phrasal verbs are really important to learn and understand very well, right? But now let's look at some prepositional verbs. For example, the first example was he came to my lecture yesterday. If you say he came my lecture yesterday, we still understand you. The meaning is not affected. Other examples of prepositional verbs, listen to. I've listened to the podcast twice. So if you drop to, I've listened to the podcast, it's a mistake, but we still understand you. Or he looked at his watch to check the time. Without at, look is still meaningful. It has the same idea. She's asked for a pay rise is another example of a prepositional verb. Okay, now I need to mention something really important here, and that's about dictionary entries. For some reason, I don't quite know why, dictionaries don't distinguish between phrasal and prepositional verbs, and they categorize both types as phrasal. So if you look up, for example, give up or listen to, they're both categorized as phrasal verbs, whereas, as I've just explained, one is phrasal, the other one is prepositional. And hopefully with my tip, you know how to distinguish between them. But if you really don't know and want to know, is this phrasal or prepositional, you need to ask a search engine. Ask the question, is this a phrasal verb or a prepositional verb? Now, that brings us to the third category, which is a combination, phrasal prepositional verbs. And that is a type of verb that is a phrasal verb with a second preposition. Now, occasionally, this second preposition doesn't create a new idea. For example, if you think of the phrasal prepositional verb, I look forward to meeting you, we have I look and forward and to. If you drop to and say I look forward meeting you, it's still very clear what you're saying. It's I await to meet you eagerly. Okay, but often this second preposition can create a new meaning, and that complicates things. Let's look at this example I've written here. We have the phrasal verbs come up. For example, the subject didn't come up last night, and come up means present itself. If we add a second preposition against to this come up, we create a new verb. We came up against a problem. Come up against has a new meaning, which is to encounter a problem. And if we add the preposition with to come up, again, we create a third meaning. Nobody could come up with a solution. Here, come up with means suggest. So that's why phrasal verbs can be complicated and challenging. And I need to mention two other complexities about phrasal verbs that you need to be aware of. And the first one is that one phrasal verb may have different meanings. For example, if you hear take off your coat, here take off means remove your coat. But if you hear the plane has taken off, in this context, take off is to leave the ground. And vice versa, the other way around, different phrasal verbs may have the same meaning. For example, I've filled in or filled out the form. Both fill in and fill out mean complete. Or we may bump into or run into Sam later. Again, bump into and run into are synonyms. They both mean the same thing, meet by chance. Right, that's that part. And now I'd like to finish by looking at how we must learn phrasal verbs, in my opinion anyway. For me, we must treat phrasal verbs like any other vocabulary item. So what does that mean? That means that we need to study them in context, not through translation. So what do we do when we come across a phrasal verbs? We should write it down with its ordinary synonym in English and an example sentence. That's really important. You need context. For example, you have come across this verb, which is new for you maybe, turn down. Okay, the ordinary synonym is decline. We write it down and then an example sentence. He turned down or declined my invitation. The second thing that you need to do, like with any vocabulary item, is to revise them regularly. But point 3, avoid learning new ones or practicing ones that you know, too many of them at the same time. A maximum of 10 per practice or study session. However, probably my fourth tip is the most important one. We really need to avoid forcing ourselves to use them in an effort to sound more fluent or conversational, because I know some of us do this. Why? Because really an ordinary verb is as good as a phrasal verb. Give up is not superior to quit. It's just a little more informal and conversational. That's all. No one, believe me, no one is counting how many phrasal verbs we use when we speak or write. It is not necessarily a sign of fluency. It's part of it, but it's not a sign of it. Okay? And very importantly, trying too hard to use them actually blocks our ability to integrate them into our speech naturally. So What happens when we learn them in the way of described, gradually, in context, and without stress? The most important thing that happens is that our listening and reading comprehension improves, which is very important. And as we begin to catch and understand the verbs that we've been studying. And then, because we now frequently catch the common ones, they will naturally, gradually, organically become part of our active vocabulary. Just to finish, the best example of this process I've described above is the verb get up, one of the very first verbs that we all learn on our English language journey. And we learned it effortlessly. Why? Because it wasn't labeled a phrasal verb, a complex topic in English. So we just picked it up through context and repetition. And we need to approach all phrasal verbs in the same way. So as we move on to our next session on phrasal verbs, I hope you will remember this and take this new approach. All right, that's the end of this part of this lesson. I hope it has been helpful to you. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. For more on this topic, click here. Remember to also check out my complete online course, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching and happy studies!